Hello, everybody. Welcome to GDT Live, presented by Game Day Tires Podcast. My name's Dayton Camo. Alongside me, Colton Davies, and today we've got a special guest, Zach Laing from the Oilersnation. Nice to have you on, Zach. How's it going?
Oh, well, it's going. I think that's the best way that I can put it right now. Trying to get up for a game tomorrow night. Obviously, quite a disappointing performance from the Edmonton Oilers in Game 5. I don't think there's really any way to sugarcoat this one. That one sucked. So, yeah, lots to dig into after a really disappointing one there.
Yeah, me and Colton have been going back and forth about this series. Lots of disappointing aspects, I guess you could say, from Edmonton. A nice effort there in Game 1. We saw them kind of take the lead and then bounce back in Game 4 to tie the series. Like inconsistencies, I guess, the power plays, the special teams. We'll get into all of that a little bit later. But Colton, how's your Monday going?
It's going, man. It's going. I'm ready for some more hockey. Fortunately, we're gonna have to wait a day or so for that, right? It's Tuesday's game, another game. So
yeah, tomorrow. I was
looking forward to it.
I'm kind of not the favorite, this schedule isn't my favorite. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I know they have to work in the NBA finals as well, and the travel distance. It's all a factor. And these guys have played what now, almost 8-9 months of hockey. So it's all a factor in there. But as from a person watching it, I kind of like that consistency,
Well, that's been the biggest thing about it, right? Is there's that 4-day wait in between some games, and my dad was one that texted me, and he was like, "Is the Stanley Cup playoffs even on anymore?" Because we had such a long wait in between that final conference final round and then Game 1 of the Stanley Cup final. So I think that that consistency, like you talked about, is something that I think they're going to have to talk about next year. But Zach can probably attest to it. I'm assuming the big reason is because of the distance between the two cities, right? And just the travel.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I guess it makes sense in one sense of the term. I think especially when you've got the long distances between, Edmonton and Florida games, it makes a little bit of sense to have the extra day in there. The one that really didn't make sense to me was the extra day between games 3 and Florida. Games 3 and 4 in Florida. Oh boy, say that 10 times fast. That one kind of sucked a little bit. I mean, I think it's a little hard to kind of carry some of that momentum, from a game to game basis. I think even just from an energy perspective, from a fan base perspective, there's been a lot of people here in Edmonton that have been kind of complaining about that. And then you go from, the jump of games 4 to 5, where you still have that travel involved, just one day off in between them. It's kind of weird. It's been kind of really weird to me for sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they can figure that one out for next year. We can have a bit of a better schedule going forward. But enough talking about the schedule and boring people out with that. What do you make of this series so far? Because for me, Zach, it's probably been the most exciting Stanley Cup final I've ever watched. And I mean, I've been around this earth 29 times, probably watched hockey for 25 of those. But this is arguably probably one of the best Stanley Cup final series I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just purely from a hockey perspective, what more could you ask for from a series? You've got two absolute Goliath teams here in the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers, who, both teams had relative ease to a certain extent in getting to where they are through the conference finals and into the Stanley Cup finals. From an Oilers perspective, games 1 and 2 against the LA Kings was the last time we really had to sweat about things for the Edmonton Oilers. They launched 6 straight come from behind victories. To beat the Kings in 6. They beat the LA or the Vegas Golden Knights in 5 games, where, the only game that the Golden Knights won was because Leon Draisaitl scored on himself. And then you look at the Dallas Stars series, and it's kind of a similar story there, where it's another 5-game series, and the Oilers kind of spotted one to the Dallas Stars in game 1, right? The Oilers, they hadn't played a team like the Florida Panthers in the playoffs coming into this series. So everybody knew that it was going to be an absolute war out there. And boy, it really has been, right? I mean, this has been just a tremendous series. Obviously, Edmonton probably would like to have some leads for longer than they have in this series. constantly having to play from behind here. But, this is a team that forced 7 on Florida last year. So now let's see if they can do it again.
What do you think the Oilers need to do to kind of fix the 5-on-5 domination by Florida? What can they do to kind of get themselves, a little more rejuvenated on the defense side of things?
This may seem like kind of an easy answer here, but play with some intensity. You look at the way that they played in game 4 and in the second, third period and into overtime there, just simple plays is really what the difference maker was for them. I think when the Oilers simplify their game a lot, focus on getting back in the defensive zone, supporting the defensemen, supporting guys on the forecheck. I mean, in game 5, how many times did we see whether it was an Oilers defenseman trying to get the puck out of his own zone or an Oilers forechecker being the only man in? Like, we saw that so many times. And everybody knows that the Florida Panthers have one of the best forecheck systems in all of hockey. They break out the puck especially well out of their defensive zone too. So it just almost seemed like the Oilers just kind of rolled over and showed their bellies in game 5. And I think what's so disappointing about that was the fact that they had so much juice coming out of game 4, coming from behind, getting the overtime win with Leon Draisaitl there. It was like, wow, okay, this is a brand new series. We're going back to Edmonton for a Saturday night hockey game at Rogers Place. It was pouring rain here all day Saturday, and there was people lined up outside of the moss pit for like 6 hours in the pouring rain just to get in. Like, the vibes were incredibly high heading into Saturday night. Yeah. And for them to lay that kind of an egg was really disappointing. And they just really had no juice. That's kind of what it was. Like, they just did not have any juice. Right. Like, the first 2 shifts were good, a couple good scoring chances early on. McDavid buzzes around the offensive zone a bit, and then it's just like they just were flat after that.
I think that's a fair way to look at it, because being flat is kind of how I looked at it too. And I looked a lot at how they were able to come back in that game 4, and then just game 5, it seemed like a different team almost. It was just the way that game 5 played out. It wasn't like it was the full Edmonton Oilers that you got in game 4, right? And I think you can probably like attest to that too. But, for Connor McDavid to finally get on the goal sheet, and I say that rolling my own eyes too, because it's such a ridiculous thing to even talk about. But does that play a role in the team at all, and just how they're doing? Like, just he's obviously the most dynamic forward out there, literally the best player in the world. Doesn't matter if he doesn't score a goal, he's still going to set up plays regardless. He's still, with or without the puck, he is going to be Connor McDavid. But there seemed like there was a lot of people really just picking at him for not scoring a goal.
Well, it wasn't for lack of trying. I mean, heading into game 5, he had 2.39 individual expected goals in all situations in the first 4 games. Grade A after grade A scoring chances he was getting. Like, he had a ton of looks, right? He's walked Ekblad twice in the series. On that first one too, he walked Barkov as well. Like, 2 of the most ridiculous plays you'll ever see a player make in the NHL nowadays, and he's still generating really high quality looks. It just wasn't really going in for him. And then, he kind of gets a bit of a break on the goal that he has, just is able to outweigh Bobrovsky for that extra second to kind of tuck it home. And it was like, okay, here we go. Like, we're back into this game. Let's go. And then Reinhart scores 45 seconds later, and just all of the gas leaves the tire immediately. Like, that's a thing that we've seen happen with the Oilers in years past, like, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when they were still kind of trying to figure out their way in terms of playing consistently in the playoffs, right? So, yeah, it was really frustrating. But I think it's a really good sign that McDavid finally got a goal in this series. He's a guy who they obviously need playing at his best. And make no mistake, he's been tremendous this series, both offensively and defensively. But yeah, I think it's a big thing that he's kind of broken through here. And hopefully this is something he can now carry through the rest of this series.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect time to bring up something. There's a graphic I want to pop up here on screen real quick. We're talking about some expected scoring chances. And, today, Mike Bartner posted something on Twitter earlier. And it was the expected scoring chances or expected goals of all players. And McDavid, you see him there right at the top, obviously, but Is there anybody else in this series that kind of surprised you? Like Draisaitl all the way down here at like below 30%. It's kind of wild.
It is. It is. I mean, I think the Edmonton Oilers are really missing Zach Hyman right now. I was talking about it in game 5 on the ON pre and post game show. Like, he's somebody who has been so good for the Edmonton Oilers for so long, right? And, this was a bit of an offensive season where he kind of stepped back or had some regression to the mean, I guess, shooting back around a career average and stuff like that. And, we were kind of waiting as fans and pundits of the team to kind of see him break through. And he really did in the playoffs here. But he has been such a physical presence for this team in that top 6 while still being able to do all the things that he does best. And he's somebody who's brought energy on such regular shifts. And now you look at this Oilers lineup and, how many different renditions of the top 6 and top 12, all of the forward lines really have we seen through this series? It's been a lot. And I think for a guy like Draisaitl, they've kind of struggled to find the right mix of line mates here for him in this series. You look at a guy like Evander Kane. Maybe somebody who's been one of the more disappointing players for me in the Stanley Cup final. Hasn't been super noticeable. Did score a goal earlier. I think it was in game 1 or game 2 there. But this is a guy who took, 3 high sticking penalties in 3 games straight in the first period that really kind of were setting the Oilers back. And, he slides down to the 4th line for game 5. Vasily Podkolzin, who had a great game in game 4, helping the Oilers get back into it with that goal. He takes early penalty. Like, the lineup just kind of became a bit of a mess for the Oilers. So, I think there's some disappointing performances all across the board here for the Edmonton Oilers. I think there's a lot of guys you could kind of talk about wanting some more from. And that includes a guy in Matthias Ekholm, who has been, arguably the best all-around defenseman the Oilers have had since they acquired him in February 2023. Like, game 4, I said it was probably the worst game that I've seen him play in an Edmonton Oilers jersey so far.
Do you think maybe the injury that he's coming off of is kind of slowing him down a bit, or?
Yeah, I wonder. I really do. I mean, when he was hurt in the regular season, there was talk that like his season was over, and it almost just seemed like he wasn't going to be able to come back whatsoever. The fact that he is able to come back was really impressive, but I didn't think he played bad through games 1 and 4, but game 5, it was really noticeable. I mean, you look at the Marchand goal early on in the game, like the game opening goal. He's a left shot defenseman who barely plays the right side. And so instinctually, what's his first step? It's going to be to the right to kind of close the center of the ice because he's used to playing on his left side. And he takes that step to the right and opens it right up for Marchand. Like, just little things like that. Or another thing, I think it was in the 3rd period, he was, going to receive a pass from Bouchard or McDavid, and he was just a step behind the puck. Like, he's just seemed like he's been a step behind, especially in that game 5. I do think that the injury could still be bothering him here because he just really isn't looking as sharp as he usually does.
Yeah, I definitely think it might have a little bit of a damper on his mental side of his game, but that's not for me to say, I guess. But he does look like he's not the old Matthias Ekholm.
This is a reoccurring topic that you have also been talking about on the ON show every day, but like, who starts in net for game 6? It's we just got the question in the chat from Big Willie Styles. And, for me, I've watched both Pickard and Skinner like back into their WHL days. Like, I've watched these guys for a long time, but like, how do you make that decision right now? It just seems like such a hard thing for Chris Knobloch to kind of handle at the moment, because you need that consistency. And like, we saw, the 7-0 record with Pickard and how comforting players look playing in front of Pickard. But then you see what happens with Skinner, and he can let in 6 goals, but then get back-to-back shutouts. Like, there just needs to be consistency in net, and there's not. So my question to you, Zach, who's going to start in game 6?
I mean, listen, I'm far from a goaltending expert here. Let's be real.
Me too.
I'll defer to what our goaltending guru and Devin Dubnyk, former Oilers goaltender, said. He said Stuart Skinner for game 6, and I think that's the right way to go. To be frank, I wasn't entirely sold about going to Pickard in game 5 to begin with, yeah, okay, I get it. Skinner's been pulled in 2 straight games. Pickard came in game 4, for that second period and was really, really good for the team. 957 save percentage through the rest of the game, only let in 1 goal on 23 shots. And obviously he was a big reason why the Oilers were able to win that game. And what does Pickard do? He seems to come up with the big saves. It's not always pretty, right? But he seems to find a way to come up with some big saves. And do they seem more comfortable in front of Pickard? I don't know. I guess you could make the argument for it, but like you look at the way that they played against the Vegas Golden Knights and the Dallas Stars with Stuart Skinner in between the pipes. You look at the way they played in front of Skinner in game 1 against Florida here. I really don't buy that narrative that they play better in front of Calvin Pickard. At the end of the day, Stuart Skinner is the goaltender who has the higher ceiling. I don't think there's any way to cut it. You might get a little bit of a higher floor from Calvin Pickard, finding ways to kind of gut out wins for this team. But at the end of the day, like I think Skinner is the guy you absolutely have to go back to here. He's the guy who you rode all the way here, after Pickard got hurt there. And even if you look at the playoffs as a whole, according to Evolving Hockey, like Skinner has 4.01 goals saved above expected, and that's including performances in games 1 and game 2 against the LA Kings, where there were it was like 13 goals against or something like that. So it really speaks to how great he's been for the Oilers here, ever since he re-entered the crease. So I agree with Dubnik. I think Skinner is the way that you got to go here for game 6.
Yeah, Skinner, he's won that WHL championship as well with Swift Current. He's played and been in big moments like that. So I think that that's the right call for game 6, especially just because he's been there before, right? Another question from the chat from Randy Workman. How come the Oilers have no answer for Sam Bennett?
How come any other team in the playoffs didn't have an answer for Sam Bennett? This guy's just on a tear. Like, I just don't think there's any other way to put it right now. He was absolutely rolling coming into this series, and he's continuing to do so here. I mean, I think, he's been doing such a good job of just putting himself in great positions to score. I mean, you look at his goal in game 5, right? Just is able to read the rebound from the shot block so well and put himself in a position to be successful. So sometimes it's just like, you just got to tip your hat to the guy and just be like, hey, this is a guy who's just on a heater right now, right? But I mean, they do need to figure out a way to slow not only him, but Brad Marchand as well. And this is the difficult thing for the Oilers, because they're kind of going, line 1, line 2, or line like going top line against top line, second line against second line, third against third. So this is kind of where you run into this issue of like, if you say, okay, let's put the McDavid line out against the Sam Bennett line, well, then you've got the Draisaitl line going up against the Barkov line, and that's a line that can do damage at any time that they want to, right? And then you look at the third line. Well, do you get McDavid or and his line against the third line? And you just keep running into the same kind of an issue here for the Edmonton Oilers, where they just don't seem to have an answer for specifically these second and third lines, who have really been the driving force for the Florida Panthers here. No disrespect to the top line or anything like that, because I think they've played well, but Barkov hasn't really been Barkov-esque here in the finals. Like, he hasn't really had a big statement on this series in any way, shape, or form. Reinhart, he's been chipping in, obviously, a couple of goals. Verhaeghe, a couple of goals as well, but those were coming when I think he was mainly on the second line before they bumped him up there. So I mean, it's a tough spot for the Edmonton Oilers to be in. They got to find like somebody in this lineup has to step up and say, okay, we're going to figure out how to shut these guys down now, because you only got 2 more cracks at the can here, and at most just 1.
Do you think there's going to be some line changes that are going to be, some shuffling with the lines, or do you think Knobloch just kind of runs with what he's got?
Yeah, I think you got to figure out a way to tweak things a little bit more here. I've been really impressed with Jeff Skinner since he's come in here in the last game or 2 as well. Part of me wonders if you slide him up the lineup to play with McDavid and Connor Brown on that top line, and maybe you try and put Nugent Hopkins down there on that third line with Henrique, so that you get a little bit more defensive responsibility with Nuge down there. Going up against like the Lundell, Marchand, Luosterainen line. I don't mind that idea at all. The second line, that's where it starts to become a bit of an issue, right? I mean, Draisaitl has been tremendous in the playoffs. I thought offensively and defensively he's been really good, even if the numbers haven't been great here in this series. Still finding ways to score big goals offensively, which is a great thing. But, Corey Perry, like, he's been fine as well. But I mean, this is a guy who's more of an offensive specialist than a defensive stalwart at this point, right? Like, the boots are kind of slowing down for Perry again the longer the playoffs go on for the second straight year. Podkolzin, I think I'd be okay with him back on that second line again. This is a guy who played a lot with Draisaitl in the regular season. Defensively, he's been really, really good for the Edmonton Oilers all season long. I'd be willing to give him another shot there for sure.
If the Panthers come out and get like another early lead, let's say, are you putting Draisaitl on the top line if you're Chris Knobloch and looking for a little bit more offense, although it kind of sacrifices that second line a little bit in the depth?
Yeah, I think you kind of have to. I mean, they're kind of the nuclear option here. We call them in Edmonton, break glass in case of emergency. The truth of the matter is over the last number of years, McDavid and Draisaitl, on any given night are playing, 30% of their 5-on-5 ice time together. They love to get them out there after a penalty kill to try and gain back some momentum or after a goal against. So they're going to play a lot together just to begin with, but it wouldn't surprise me if they try and load up that top line here and then try and say to the second and third lines, hey, you guys just have to shut them down defensively, right? That's all you need to worry about is just getting the puck out of your zone, getting it up the ice because, 97 and 29 are going to be coming over the boards very, very quickly. I would not be surprised if that's what they go to here for game 6 because they got to find a way to break through offensively, especially early on in the game. I think they've given up the first goal against in every game so far in this series. They did a much better job of staying disciplined early in game 5, which I thought really helped their case overall. But yeah, I think going nuclear pretty early is something we'll see here in 6.
That kind of gives us a good segue into our special teams because, McDavid and Draisaitl, they're so deadly on the ice when they're together on the special teams. But the Panthers have kind of still been able to find a way to shut them down. So what do you think they have to go differently on here on the power play?
Yeah, great question. What did I see in game 5 on the Oilers power play? The Panthers shutting it down completely. They did such a good job of getting into the lanes for the cross seam passes or, trying to find, cycling the puck back up to Bouchard and stuff like that. They got to change up the look a little bit here. I don't know exactly what that looks like here for them, but they got to try something a little bit different on the power play because, it's been successful, I think, for the most part. But, in a game 5 where you go 0 for 4 and you look at the story of that game and how the Oilers kind of let it slip away, power play goal or two would have been really big for that team to kind of get the momentum back in their favor.
Yeah, 100%. Colton, you want to throw that question back up there from Willie?
Yeah, I got another question from Willie, though I want to put up first here. He has a nerd question. What is the percentage of 97 and 29 on a line together to score a goal? Do we know that? I don't know that off the top of my head. So
I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I assume it's high. Like,
yeah,
you kind of have to expect. The other question Willie has tossed into the chat here. Who do you think who's your X factor for game 6?
Kind of maybe a little bit of a cop-out answer here, but Connor McDavid. We're waiting for him to take over this series. He did so last year and really helped drag this series to 7 games. It doesn't really feel like he's taken over a game yet here in this series the way that he had last year. And, last year he was dealing with injuries too in the finals that were hampering him, and he was still a major factor. Not to say that he hasn't been a major factor in the series so far, because I think he's done a ton of tremendous things here, but you're kind of left wanting a little bit more here from 97. And now that we're really getting down to crunch time, I think this is the time where we're going to start to see him, really turn it up a notch. And something worth mentioning too, like the Oilers as a whole, the longer a series gets, the better they've been for the last number of years. So, I know that this series, is 3-2 Florida right now, but, I'm not counting out the Edmonton Oilers whatsoever until, the final buzzer sounds on whatever the final game is of the series.
I saw a tweet this morning that talked about Crosby and the Penguins losing in Game 5 of their match against the Red Wings, and then came back to win 6 and 7. Maybe the same destinies here for McDavid. Personally, I it's very hard for me to write this team off and write them off, right? Like you've got two of the three I would say two of the three best players in the world on your team. It's like you said, until this final buzzer is gone and this Stanley Cup is hoisted by whoever, it's not over until it's over. So for a statement game from McDavid in Game 6, I think that's more than fair. I actually bet on him to take a hat trick last game because I just kind of had a feeling he might just, light it up. Didn't end up happening. But, one guy that I kind of wanted to get your opinion on is Kasperi Kapanen. I've really liked him throughout this playoffs. What can you kind of say about Kapanen a little bit more? Just you're more of an Oilers guy, obviously. What can you say about Kapanen?
Yeah, I mean, he's been great when he's been in the lineup. I think what we've seen in the playoffs from him is kind of what we saw in the regular season from him. Claimed him off waivers in November. I was jokingly saying a couple of days ago that it completed the Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg offer sheet transaction with Kapanen coming to Edmonton on waivers. But it took him a little bit to kind of get going in Edmonton. And then, he would have these spurts and these bursts of like 3, 4, 5, 6 really solid games, and then he'd have a real stinker, and then he'd slide back down the lineup or slide out of the lineup entirely, and then he'd sit for a couple of games, then he'd come back in. It would take him a game or two, and then he'd have a nice little run again where he's looking really productive, and then it would kind of slide off again. And that's kind of what it's felt like here. I mean, he said when he entered the series against Vegas in Game 4, that he was kind of disappointed that he hadn't been in playing at that point in the playoffs, but he comes in, has a good Game 4, obviously huge game winner for, the series clincher in overtime in Game 5 there. I thought he looked really good against Dallas, but it seems like he struggled a little bit here, against Florida, following that similar kind of theme that we saw in the regular season. Wouldn't be surprised to see him get back in. He's somebody he's so fast, right? He's got such great speed. I could see him sliding back into this lineup, playing on that second line with Draisaitl and Podkolzin. And I think that they need that. I think they need that speed on that line with a guy like Kapanen being able to get in on that forecheck quick, disrupt things. Because again, going up against that Bennett line a lot, they've been great.
Kapanen's got that clutch factor to him as well, right? So there is that.
There's another question coming in here from Randy. Do you think, and I also have a kind of a sidebar question to go along with it. Does the Panthers mentality come into it? Do you think they're in the Oilers' head? And also, but do you think the Oilers going into a Game 6 on the road in Florida have a different feeling than last year going into a Game 6 at home, where the Panthers, they're kind of just thinking, let's end this thing at home?
I don't know. I don't buy into the mentality that the Panthers are in the Oilers' heads. I mean, we could talk about what happened at the end of Game 3 as much as we want to, but there was none of that in Game 4. There wasn't really any of that in Game 5 until the final buzzer kind of went and things were a little chippy there on the ice. Like, there hasn't really been what we saw in Game 3 come back out here in these final 2 games. So I don't think the Panthers are in the Oilers' head, really whatsoever. And to be totally honest, like, I didn't really think the Panthers had like a tremendous Game 5. They capitalized on their chances, and I think that's really what it kind of came down to. That was kind of a sloppy, greasy game overall. I mean, it was kind of an ugly hockey game. There wasn't a ton of volume. The under hit in that game for the first time all series long, right? I didn't think they were tremendous or anything like that, to the point that like it seemed like they were in the Oilers' heads or anything. It was just kind of, for the Oilers, they just couldn't bear down when they got the chances that they did. And I think that's kind of what it came down to.
Let's talk a little bit about the defense. And I've wanted to talk to somebody in Oilers Nation for a while about this, but Jake Wallman seems like he's really added an extra step to that defense. You saw the big goal, obviously. I believe that was last game that he scored. What is Wally, as I think people call him, what does he kind of add to that defense core?
So much. He's been just a tremendous addition for this blue line. They talked about it. Chris and Oblaw talked about it a little bit before the series got underway at Media Day, kind of giving some props to Stan Bowman for the acquisition, because it's one thing to just go out there and get a defenseman who can play good defensively. But this time of year, you need guys who can not only play well defensively, but are efficient at moving the puck, especially against a team like the Florida Panthers. And boy, Wallman has been just tremendous at doing that. He's been solid defensively for the team in his own zone. There's still some warts there for sure, but he's such an effective puck mover, whether it's skating it up, with his feet or throwing up a pass or something like that. And I think it's been a huge addition to this Oilers blue line. I think if you look at this blue line as a whole right now, kind of running into the lefty righty issue a little bit here because, whether it's Brett Kulak, Matthias Ekholm, or Jake Wallman, like all three of these guys have been playing on their offside, throughout the playoffs since Ty Emberson came out. Obviously, Emberson being a right shot guy who kind of held down that third pairing for pretty much the whole regular season and into the playoffs. It's kind of been a bit of an issue. I mean, again, you look at the Marchand goal and Ekholm taking that wrong step, going to the right instead of the left there. Brett Kulak, somebody who has excelled in the past at playing on his offside, really struggled to do so, playing with Darnell Nurse, right? So, yeah, I think that's been a bit of an issue for this blue line here because, it seems like guys are a little bit uncomfortable kind of on that, playing on that offside.
Yeah, it does seem that way. But overall, the Oilers' defense core, I think, has really rejuvenated and figured itself out. I kind of wanted to touch on one thing, and that's you probably got a chance to listen to McDavid talk this morning. What did you make of him saying that everybody has another level, myself included?
He's absolutely right. Again, we're getting down to crunch time here, right? Everybody has to find that next level in their game. And, McDavid is, he'll always be the first person to say, I need to be better. And it always makes me laugh because it's like, yeah, but you're like the best player in the world. Like, how can you be better than you already are? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think for him, maybe in that goal scoring department is where he's kind of talking about it there, right? Figuring out a way, to convert these expected goals into actual goals. I think it's a great comment from him, and kind of calling out the team in a sense here too, saying, hey, like we've all got to figure out a way to be better here because you're only getting 2 more cracks at this at most.
Yeah.
Talking about McDavid being vocal in the room, we all saw it last year. We all saw it on the documentary that came out. He obviously knows we all saw it. Do you think he's still being vocal like that in the room? Is that obviously the way to go here?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, he is a very, very passionate, fiery leader. I think there's a lot of things that kind of go on behind the scenes with his leadership that, just don't get looked at or talked about or anything like that. I mean, this is a guy who you hear all of the players talk about it on a regular basis. This is the guy who sets the bar. He sets the standard of what the Edmonton Oilers are as a franchise. And it's a very high bar. It's been a high bar in Edmonton since this team entered the NHL because of all of the success that they had, right? You look even through the 90s and the 2000s with some really down years. Like the expectation was always playoffs every single year for the Edmonton Oilers, and anything less than that was a disappointment, right? So, now we're at this place where, the Oilers are a consistent playoff team. They've made the playoffs, I think it's 6 straight years now, which ties the second longest or is now the second longest streak of consecutive playoff appearances dating back, to the 80s and 90s. I think those teams got up to like 13 straight or something ridiculous like that. So got a couple more years to go to kind of, try and tie that record up there. But, the standard now for the Edmonton Oilers is it's Stanley Cup or bust every single year. And, they've gotten to the promised land. They've gone to, deep in the finals 2 straight years now. Just a matter of trying to figure out how to kind of take that next step. And again, this team is still learning. You can talk as much as you want about, it now being a veteran team here in Edmonton. But at the end of the day, the Stanley Cup finals are still an entirely different animal than the Western Conference finals are, than the second round is, than the first round is. So, the Oilers are still kind of trying to find their way here on playing Stanley Cup final hockey. And they got to find that next level. I think you said it well.
Yeah, 100%. I think he's obviously the driving force, and that's probably the only way they're going to get back into this thing. It is the only way they're going to get back into this thing.
Is there something that Edmonton can do to fix the special teams, though? I know we touched on it already a little bit, but like, is there something that they could maybe do overnight to kind of fix it? Or is that just they just have to focus on 5v5 hockey and just light it up there.
I think you got to try and focus on 5-on-5 game, really. I mean,
Yeah.
Stay out of the penalty box. That's the best thing you can do for this penalty kill right now, which has been a sore spot for this team all season long.
Right.
It's definitely been something that they've really struggled to be solid on. Even in the regular season, there were stretches where the penalty kill was just absolutely horrendous, and it's not been good for the team here. In the cup final or in the playoffs. The power play, I think there's some things they can change up for sure. Maybe start to try and change up the looks a little bit, or how you're kind of transporting the puck and cycling it around offensively, because again, they've got things that work and they work extremely well. Put the puck on Leon Draisaitl's stick and let him shoot.
Yep.
I mean, that works a lot of the time, right? Let Evan Bouchard wind up and blast one from the point. That one is very productive as well. But even situations like, on a rebound, Corey Perry trying to find Nuge in the slot, that got blocked, stopped a couple of times in game 5 there. So I think it's just a matter of trying to maybe find a way to get a bit of a different look on that top power play unit. And I think that's kind of what you got to do here at this point.
Yeah, 100%. One couple more things, then we'll let you go, Zach. What did you make of the antics in game 4? When everything I think it was game 4, when everything boiled over and we had that scuffle with everybody. Did you kind of think that was it uncharacteristic of the Oilers, or was it just a matter of everything boiling over to a point where everyone was just frustrated?
Yeah, it was game 3, and I do think it was just it was game 3. 6-1 loss for the Oilers in that one. I think it was a little bit of a boiling point. I mean, I hate talking about this because it's such a taboo topic, but the officiating in this series has been just atrocious. Let's just be frank here. And I don't think it's specific to the Edmonton Oilers here either. I think both ways, especially in the first 4 games of the series, the referees lost control of those games, and especially in game 3, it felt really, really bad. I think it was a situation where, tempers kind of just flared for the Oilers. And hey, if you're not going to go down fighting on the scoreboard, then you got to try and go down fighting some other kind of way, right? I'm totally fine with it. It happens in the playoffs. I mean, all playoffs long, we've seen it happen where end of games kind of can get away from teams and it can turn into a bloodbath. I'm looking at you, Montreal Canadiens and Washington Capitals, with your brawl that spilled into the benches and off of the benches. So, stuff like that's going to happen. So I've got no issue with it. Nobody had an issue with it. I mean, McDavid said after the game that he liked to see that from his team. Chris Knoblaw talked about it and said, hey, look, it's not like our skilled guys are going out there and doing this kind of stuff. It's the people who want to be doing it. Your Evander Kanes, your Vasily Podkolzins, your Wallmans, your Trent Fredericks, all that kind of stuff. So I love it. And I think the Oilers need more of that kind of mentality in their game of like, we are going to war and we are going to do whatever it takes here to win this game and win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, Chris Knobloch talked about before the series. He actually said that he thinks that the Oilers have the tools, the physical tools to go match up with the Florida Panthers. So far, I don't know if we've seen it, but do you think if they can show up, do you think if that's something the Oilers can present at the start of game 5, they might be able to take the game over?
Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, I think that's going to be kind of the key for the Oilers here in game 6 is coming out early on and being a presence out there on the ice. Don't take any penalties, but finish your checks, hit the defensemen, hit them hard, wear them down. Like that's something the Edmonton Oilers can do and have done all playoffs long leading up to this series. I mean, you look at the pretty much every series up until this point, we saw the opposing team, the Kings, the Golden Knights, the Stars, shorten up their bench from the forward ranks and the defensive ranks. And the Oilers just absolutely pounded these teams with physicality. And again, I talked about it earlier on the show here, missing Zach Hyman. Like, I think this is somebody who, he was averaging almost like 8 hits per game out there, like hitting literally everything that moved. And, I think the Oilers have kind of been missing that a little bit. You don't really have a physical presence on that top line right now beside McDavid and Ryan Nugent Hopkins. Maybe Evander Kane slides up and plays on that top line to kind of bring that back, because I thought Hyman's physicality was able to help create offense and turnovers in the offensive zone that were leading to looks for the Oilers all playoffs long, rather.
Yeah, I think if you have a guy like Evander Kane that far down in the lineup, like we talked about earlier, just piling the offense onto the top six at least. That's my best bet if I'm Chris Knobloch.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, we're gonna let you go, but before we're not gonna get you to give a full prediction, but we'd like a first goal scorer prediction from you. Who do you think scores first for the Oilers?
I mean, I got to go with McDavid. I really do. Look, I mean, he's the one who's got to come out and really help set the tempo for this team offensively. He's done so a couple of games in a row with his first couple of shifts, getting some really high quality scoring chances. If the Oilers can go out there and get the first goal, and if it can come off McDavid's stick, that's going to lift this team up in a really big way.
Perfect. Well, Zach, thanks so much for joining us, man. We really appreciate this. Everybody, you can go follow Zach on Twitter at ZJ Laing, and you can also check out all of his stuff over on Oilersnation.com, the greatest website on planet Earth. Zach, thanks again, buddy. We'll do this again.
Sounds great. My pleasure. Thanks for having me today, guys.
Take care, Zach.
Of course. Take care.
Well, Colton, another great episode. One of our best, actually. We thank Zach for coming on today. Anything you want to touch on before we end things?
A couple NCAA commitments over the weekend. Pearson By is going to Penn State. He committed OHL player Jackson.
I think that's how you say it.
Is it
Bowie?
Yeah.
Pierce Bowie.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. All right. I got that wrong. So he's going to Penn State.
It's okay. It's a crazy spelling.
Mbuyi. So explain to me how to pronounce that. And then Jackson Smith, Tri-City Americans defenseman, top 10 draft pick in the NHL. He is headed to Penn State. And ladies and gentlemen, we will be having Jackson Smith live on the show tomorrow.
Yes, sir. So everyone, tune in tomorrow. It's going to be a great one. 3 p.m. Atlantic, 2 Eastern, 11 Pacific. It's going to be good. We're also going to have Anthony Donati, the prospect Don. He's going to be joining us to talk a little bit about some prospects, the NHL draft. It's going to be a good episode tomorrow. You don't want to miss it. And everyone tuning in, if you want to listen to our podcast episodes, those are all also on YouTube, and the audio versions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Colton, anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah. I was just going to say Jackson Smith is on tomorrow at 11 a.m. 2 Eastern time. And then Anthony Donati, a.k.a. the prospect Don, will be joining us at 11:30 or 2:30 Eastern time. We'll have some tweets out for that one. We're really looking forward to talking to Jackson Smith. Of course, he is a top 10 projected NHL draft pick who just committed to Penn State yesterday. So that'll be a really big talk, NCAA talk with him. We've got quite a few other guests lined up for this week. We're really looking forward to it. But again, thank you to all 450 plus of you who have tuned in to today's episode. Absolutely fucking insane that we hit that mark. We appreciate all of you. Hit the like button, hit the follow button on Twitter, subscribe, and we'll catch you guys tomorrow for another live show.
All right. See you, everybody, right back here on GDT Live.